8 decks, 416 cards, and a 23-year-old math tutor from a suburb outside Phoenix who taught himself to see every single one of them, in order, after a single pass through the shoe. His name was Adrian Kohler, and for 11 weeks in the spring of 2019, he was the most feared player on the Nevada Baccarat circuit. Then he vanished. Not because he lost, because every casino floor in 3 states quietly agreed he was never allowed to sit down again. Let me take you back. March 2019. A place called the Silverbrook Grand, tucked off the north end of the Vegas Strip. The kind of property that pretends to be old money European, but really just launders the same math as everyone else. Adrian walked in wearing a gray hoodie, khakis, and running shoes that squeaked on the marble. He was carrying a leather messenger bag with exactly $9,800 in cash. Not 10, 9-8. Under the federal reporting threshold on purpose. He sat down at a mini Baccarat table where the minimum wager was 100 and the maximum was 5,000. He bought in for the full amount, and for the first 40 minutes, he lost. That part matters, remember it. Now here's what the pit boss saw. A skinny kid, bad posture, betting small on player, small on banker, occasionally taking a tie for $100 like a tourist who read the rules on the plane. He was down about 2,200 after those first 40 minutes. The pit boss actually walked past twice and clocked him as a recreational player. Somebody who'd be broke by breakfast and hitting the ATM by lunch. The eye in the sky wasn't even watching that table. Why would they? And here's where it gets interesting. At the start of the 4th shoe, Adrian did something the pit boss didn't notice. He asked the dealer very politely if he could stand up and stretch his back for the shuffle. The dealer said sure. Adrian stood behind the table. He watched every card go into the shuffler. Every single one. Then he sat back down. His first wager on that fresh shoe was 300 on banker. Won. Second hand, 1,200 on player. Won. Third hand, 3,000 on banker. Won. Fourth hand, 5,000, maximum bet, on banker. Won. By the 10th hand of that shoe, Adrian had turned his remaining 7,600 into 41,000 and change. And the pit boss, a man named Miguel Ortega, 22 years on the floor, was standing behind the dealer with his arms crossed and his jaw locked. Because Miguel had seen card counters. Miguel had seen edge sorters. Miguel had seen guys with earpieces getting fed data from a van in the parking lot. This wasn't any of that. This kid was betting into the correct outcome before the cards came out of the shoe. Not most of the time, every time. Miguel picked up the phone. Now, what Adrian was doing, the actual mechanic of it, I need to explain because it's the reason the entire industry lost its mind over him. Most people think you can't memorize a shuffled shoe. 8 decks, 416 cards, riffled and cut. It's supposed to be impossible. The house edge on Baccarat is a hair over 1% for banker, a hair over 1.25 for player. Nobody beats Baccarat long term, nobody. Except Adrian didn't need to memorize the shuffled order. He'd spent 2 years in his mother's basement working on a technique he called sequencing. He watched the pre-shuffle order. He tracked where cards clumped after the machine's cut. Then, using a method he'd basically reverse-engineered from a 1990s Advantage Play manuscript that had gone out of print, he could predict, with something like 68% accuracy, whether the next banker card would beat the next player card. In a game where you're supposed to be flipping coins with a slight lean toward the house, 68% is nuclear. That's not an edge, that's a printing press. By closing time on that first Tuesday, Adrian had $216,000 in yellow chips stacked in front of him. The Silverbrook comped him a 2-bedroom suite. They sent up a bottle of Japanese whiskey he didn't drink. They asked if he wanted a car in the morning. Adrian said no thanks, colored up, and walked to the cage. He asked for a check. The cage manager, a woman named Denise, asked him for identification. He handed her an Arizona driver's license. Real name, real address, real everything. That's the part that later drove the surveillance guys crazy. He wasn't hiding. He didn't think he was doing anything wrong. Legally, he wasn't. The cage cut him a check. He walked out at 4 in the morning, slept in his car in a Walmart parking lot 2 miles away because he didn't want to pay for the room he'd been comped. That tells you everything about Adrian. Wednesday, he did it again. Different property, this one downtown. Won $94,000. Thursday, back to the Silverbrook. Won $180,000. By Sunday of that first week, Adrian Kohler was up almost $600,000, and a very quiet phone call had been placed between the surveillance director at the Silverbrook and a security consultant who works for what people in the industry call the Griffin list. Not the old Griffin book, the new one, the private one. The list that gets shared, off the record, between about 42 casino properties across Nevada, New Jersey, and Mississippi. If your name lands on that list, you don't get told. You just start noticing that every time you walk into a casino, a floor supervisor materializes at your elbow within 90 seconds and, very politely, tells you your action is no longer welcome. But that was still a week away. Week 2, Adrian got greedy. Not in the way you'd think. He didn't press his bets. He didn't get sloppy. He got greedy about how many properties he could hit before word spread. He drove to Reno. He hit 3 joints in 2 nights. Won $340,000 at one, $91,000 at another, walked away flat at the third because the shuffle machine was a newer model and his sequencing didn't hold. Smart, right? A guy who'd let ego get to him would have kept playing to prove a point. Adrian just tipped the dealer $40, said thanks, and left. Quick thing, and then I get back to it. Watching a story like this, people always message me the same question. If I ever sat down at a table, where would it actually be safe? Look, I only play at places I've personally vetted, because the payout hits the account without drama, and I've never once been jerked around on a withdrawal. Where exactly, I left in the description for anyone who wants it. Back to Adrian. Week 3 is when the phone calls became a group text. The Silverbrook flagged him internally on the Monday. By Wednesday, 3 other Vegas properties had him in their systems. By Friday, a surveillance chief in Atlantic City, a guy I'll call Ray because he still works in the industry and would prefer to keep his job, got an email with a photograph of Adrian's face, his real name, and a 2-line summary. Suspected shuffle tracking sequencer. Unknown method. Do not deal to. Do not deal to. Not back off. Not watch. Do not deal to. That's a phrase you almost never see, because a casino wants your action. Even a card counter, they'll usually just cap your bets or shuffle up on you. Telling every dealer in the building to refuse a specific customer, that's the nuclear option. Adrian didn't know any of this yet. Week 4, he walked into a property in Laughlin, a river town on the Nevada-Arizona border, and asked for a seat at the high-limit Baccarat pit. The floor manager smiled, said, "Absolutely, sir, one moment." Walked into the back. Came out 90 seconds later with 2 uniformed security officers and a printout of Adrian's Arizona driver's license photo. Told him, and I'm quoting from the incident report that later leaked, quote, "Mr. Kohler, your business is not something this property is able to accommodate, tonight or in the future. Please collect your belongings and exit through the main doors." End quote. Adrian asked why. They didn't answer. He drove 3 hours to another casino. Same thing. Different words, same result. He drove to a third. Same. By the end of that night, he had been refused entry at 7 separate properties across 2 states, and he still didn't fully understand what was happening. Here's the part almost nobody knows. The Silverbrook, the property where he'd started, had done something the other casinos hadn't. Their surveillance team had spent 11 days reviewing every single hand Adrian played, cross-referencing his bet timing against the pre-shuffle camera footage. And they figured out, mostly, what he was doing. Not perfectly, but close enough. And what they did next is the reason Adrian became a legend in a very small, very quiet corner of the advantage play world. They wrote a paper, an internal one, 12 pages, called it the Kohler Protocol, and they distributed it to their sister properties and to that private Griffin-adjacent list. The paper explained, step by step, how Adrian was tracking pre-shuffle sequences using the specific model of shuffle machine most of the industry was using at that time. And within about 6 weeks of Adrian's run, every major property in Nevada quietly replaced or reprogrammed those shuffle machines. Adrian Kohler, single-handed, 23 years old, sleeping in his car, forced the entire Baccarat wing of the American casino industry to swap out its equipment. He never played Baccarat professionally again. Total confirmed take across the 11 weeks, $1.4 million, before taxes. He paid the IRS. He bought his mother a house in Chandler, Arizona for $380,000 cash. He put the rest in index funds. Last anyone in the community heard, he was tutoring high school kids in calculus for $40 an hour and refusing to talk about any of it. The lifetime ban is still active. Every property he hit, and about 30 he never even walked into, has his photograph in their system. If he walks into a casino in Nevada tomorrow, he gets 90 seconds before somebody in a dark suit is standing next to him, with a polite smile and a firm hand near his elbow. Now here's the question I want you to sit with. Adrian Kohler didn't cheat. He didn't use a device. He didn't collude with a dealer. He used his brain, and a technique anyone with 2 years of obsessive practice could theoretically learn. The casinos didn't accuse him of a crime. They just decided collectively that a player thinking too hard was a threat to the business model, and they used a private, unregulated blacklist to remove him from the industry. So who was in the wrong here? The kid who did math better than the house? Or the house for banning a man whose only weapon was memory? Tell me in the comments. I read them. And if this kind of story is what you're here for, you already know.